Hey, everybody. Welcome. My name is Brooke. I'm a program coordinator here with Alzheimer's Services. Welcome to our first presentation of the Making Sense of Sense series for the fall. I have here our brochure on your screen of our next two presentations that are coming up. One on November 12th via Zoom at noon on long-term care insurance, and then another at November 19th at 10 a.m. in our office, where you can create your own caregiver binder full of essential paperwork. By attending today's session and the next two, you can receive a free consultation with a select group of elder law attorneys. So we hope that you join us for those. I also want to talk to you about some of our other upcoming events that we have coming up. November is Alzheimer's Awareness Month, and this is our first official event of Alzheimer's Awareness Month for this year. We have so many events coming up, so I encourage you to look at our upcoming calendar on our website of all of the things we have coming up. For example, our Fall Fest, and we have free memory screenings all throughout our service area. And I also want to mention that registration is now open for our 2025 education conference, and that's the info on the screen right now. Our 2025 education conference will focus all on dementia risk reduction, and it's going to be held on January 29th next year, and I hope you all join us for those. So just some housekeeping while our presenter gets all set up. All of our participants will remain muted throughout this call. If you have any questions, just go ahead and put them in the chat box. We will be recording this presentation and putting it on our YouTube channel afterwards. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our presenter for today, Mr. Ryan Pierce. Mr. Pierce is originally from Laplace and has been educating families about pre-planning funeral and cemetery decisions for the past 17 years in the greater New Orleans and Baton Rouge areas. He currently serves as a manager of family services for Resthaven Gardens of Memory and Funeral Home, Baker Funeral Home, and Ascension Funeral Home in Gonzales. I realize that many people may think this topic is appropriate for the spooky season that we are in right now, but being prepared for inevitable life decisions life decisions such as end-of-life decisions and funeral planning is always a good decision to feel prepared and to feel like you have enough knowledge to consciously make a good decision. So we welcome Mr. Pierce today to take some of the spook out of this topic, take some of the taboo out of this topic that is very important. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it on over to him. Thank y'all for being here today.
Hello, everyone. Again, I'm Ryan Pierce. I'm here to help you out with some questions today. We're going to have a little small presentation, and then afterwards we'll have a time that you'll be able to ask some questions, and I'll hopefully be able to give you the answers. A lot of respect for all of you that are out there as caretakers for your loved ones as you kind of go through these steps with them. And this is a big decision, some big decisions that you have to kind of make for them. So we're going to try and make some sense of that. So again, thank you to Brooke and the Alzheimer's Association services to invite us to come in and help you guys out. As we kind of go through this, I'll answer some questions, like I said, at the end. So why are we here? You're here because you're looking for answers of what you need to do to make sure you're prepared for that time when your loved one moves on from this place. And a lot of times people have these questions, and more than why, we're here, it's more who is your why. So typically you're here because you're caretaking for someone that can't take care of themselves anymore. And hopefully they've communicated to you at some point in time or have already told you kind of what their wishes are: burial versus cremation, casketed service, or what have you. But more than anything, they're the most important. And in our life, we have many stressful events, and those stressful events are a number of things. And the University of Washington Medical School actually did a survey, and they surveyed 10,000 people. Now, I don't know how much you know about surveys or polling and that type of thing, but normally those surveys or polls of like 100 people or 1,000 people. Well, the University of Washington Medical School surveyed 10,000 people, and they said, what are life's most stressful events? And these are the 6 things that they came up with. One being divorce, death of a spouse, loss of a job, marriage, death of a loved one, and personal injury or illness. Now they took those and they said, okay, rank those of what you say are life's most stressful events. And of that response, this is the ranking that they came up with. The number 6 most stressful event was the loss of a job. Number 5 was marriage. Number 4 was the personal injury or illness. Number 3 was the death of a loved one. Number 2 was divorce. And number 1 was death of a spouse. Now, when you look at these, one thing that's in common here are the 2 that made the top 3. Out of the top 6 life's most stressful events, 2 of the top 3 had to deal with death. And one thing that also is interesting about this is that each one of these could have been prearranged for. You can literally prearrange for a loss of a job, be prepared for it by saving up, 6 months of income and having it in a savings account or access to it, that you, in the event that you lose your income, there's some income for you. You can plan for marriage, not just the wedding. My wife and I are planning for 2 weddings right now for 2 of our kids, but the actual planning of that marriage to make sure that you're on the same page about things, that you agree upon issues, and that how you spend your money, and about children and how you're going to raise them. You can plan about personal injury or illness, have an insurance, medical insurance, have a long-term or short-term disability insurance, making sure that you see your doctor on a regular basis. That's all ways to plan for an illness or an injury, proper testing. Divorce even. There are people that plan for divorce. They may get a prenuptial agreement leading into the marriage, making sure that if something were to happen in that marriage, that things will be planned. But many people don't want to talk about this topic. They don't want to talk about the death of their loved one that's going to be inevitable at some point, the death of their spouse, and thinking about not having them with us. But when that time comes, what do you do? Like, what now? Who do I call? Where do I start? How am I going to get through this? When you sit down with a funeral director, they're going to ask you 100 different questions, and these are just some of them. What photographs should I use? Should I do a wood or a metal casket? If it's cremation, what type of urn? I mean, there's urns now that are metal, they're wood, but they're also made out of cork and cloisonné glass, and you name it, they pretty much make an urn out of salt urns even. They make urns out of so many different materials. How would you want that to be? What's mom's favorite flower? I don't know about you, but my wife and I, we have 4 kids. You ask our 4 kids, what's mom's favorite flower? You'll get 4 different answers. And if you ask me, you'll probably get a 5th different answer. So being on the same page about some of those things are important. But when you sit down with that funeral director and you haven't had this discussion, sometimes it could be difficult. Even what's mom's maiden name and what was her mother's maiden name? In the state of Louisiana, the state of Louisiana death certificate requires that we get the person that passed, we get their parents' first, middle, last name, maiden name, and where they were born. So the person that you're caretaking, do you know their parents' information? Do you have that information written down? Because the state of Louisiana is going to require that we put that information on the state of Louisiana death certificate. And if we don't know, we sometimes have to call a person at the last minute while you're sitting across from the funeral director. And I need to call Aunt Sissy and see what mama's mother's maiden name was, what grandma's maiden name was, and where was she born. We run into that a whole lot. And so sometimes pre-planning, you can get that information written down like on a vital statistics sheet. Many of the funeral homes in the area have these planning guides that are normally complimentary, and you can go buy and get one, and they can literally, you could fill out all of that information and have it kind of put together ahead of time. You can even sit down and pre-plan and even get those things funded. So these are just some of those 99 questions that we end up asking. But if 2 questions are left unanswered, they can haunt those left behind. Like, did I, is it what they would have wanted? And did I do the right thing? I work with many people, and a lot of times when we ask some of these questions, the answer to that question is, I don't know. They don't know exactly what their loved ones would have desired. I've sat with many families that husband and wives haven't even discussed if they want to be cremated or in a casket for burial. And if they hadn't had that conversation and they're sitting there and they can't ask them now, a lot of times they turn to their kids, and their kids don't really make that decision. They're like, I don't know, that's kind of a huge decision, mom, to make. So having those conversations and making those decisions ahead of time makes them so much easier for the people that are us that are left behind. So that's why I encourage folks to sit down with a pre-planning specialist, somebody that knows how to help guide you through that process and walk you through them. Now, one of the things that people ask a lot of time are what funeral services are available in our state here in Louisiana. And these are just a couple of them I'm going to go through. You can have a traditional service with a casket. That's what everybody thinks of as a funeral. When you went to see your grandparents or your great grandparents, you walked in and their casket was open, and you went and paid your respects, and then the casket got closed and you had your funeral mass or funeral service, maybe at the church or at the funeral home. But service can be held at church, funeral homes, event centers, fellowship halls, gravesides, etc. I've had people say, look, I want to have my funeral service at the casino. I mean, a lot of different options, and these days, a lot of people want them to be very personalized. So the burial can be in a private church, public, or veteran cemetery. You're not limited there. There's even some people that dedicate a portion of their own property as cemetery on their private land. So, I mean, that's also a potential possibility. Immediate burial with casket. That's a no services. The casket is brought directly to the burial space for interment, and the burial can be private, again, in a church, public, or veteran cemetery. And then the last one that's typical with traditional burial is green burial or natural burial. And that's somewhat new to Louisiana. There's not a whole lot of offerings for this type of burial just yet. In other areas of the country, it's a lot more popular, but here in Louisiana, it's been a little slow to get started. There's usually no embalming. There's minimal environmental impact, and there's use of a biodegradable shroud or casket. That shroud is normally made of cotton or silk. The caskets are normally made out of willow or other biodegradable materials. And here's the hard part is that the burial has to be in a green burial or a hybrid cemetery. Our particular cemetery is a hybrid cemetery where we have traditional burial and potentially green burial in it. There's some other hybrids in the Metairie, New Orleans area. As of right now, not listed on any of the certified green burial websites are as a certified green burial cemetery where it's just green burial. To be certified green burial, you have to have only green burials in it. Because it isn't so popular yet, I don't know of any private or public green burial cemeteries that are yet available. So that's our traditional burial services. As far as cremation services, and a lot of people not aware of this, you can do a cremation service with the casket and the body present. That way the services are held both at the church, the funeral home, the event center, the fellowship hall, the graveside, and the burial is done after the cremation occurs. So the body's present at the funeral service, just like at a traditional funeral service. The casket's open, people can pay their respects, and the casket's then closed, the funeral service takes place, and then after that, we then move forward with the actual cremation process. And then a day or two later, the burial of the cremated remains can occur. The other type of cremation service is a cremation memorial service where the urn is present. The body's not present. The cremation process has already taken place, and then the urn would be at the church, funeral home, event center, fellowship hall, graveside, etc. The burial can then also take place in a private church, public, or veteran cemetery, and I'll show you some of those cremation options here in a moment. And then the third type is what they call direct cremation. You may have heard of it before. There's no services. The family would receive the cremated remains after the cremation process is complete, and the burial then can take place in one of those cemetery options if you desire. And then there's the donation of the body to a Bureau of Anatomical Services. That's like LSU Medical School, LSU Faces Laboratory, Tulane, etc. The thing about this is normally they suggest that you pre-apply. And you can go onto their websites, Louisiana, LSU Medical School, Tulane, LSU Faces, and pre-apply for this. Now, once you pre-apply, they make a determination and give you a determination. But it doesn't necessarily guarantee a spot, but what it does is give you preference of acceptance. That preference of acceptance is this, is if you meet the qualifications for acceptance and they're currently accepting bodies for the medical purposes, then they would take your pre-planned person prior to someone that hadn't planned. But there are some things, as you can see, that are also conditions of acceptance at the time of death. Because when we pre-plan, we don't know for this that we would meet the acceptance, but this is some things that the body has to meet. So first off, there has to be no autopsy performed. So for some reason, the state or the local coroner's office determines that there needs to be an autopsy, the body cannot be donated to the Bureau of Anatomical Services. There cannot be any embalming. So if you were in another state and they embalmed you to come over state lines, and then you plan to be donated, you might want to make sure, you might want to donate the body to a organization in the state that you passed in, because of the fact that the body's been embalmed, they will not accept you in the Louisiana Bureau of Anatomical Services. Any type of infectious disease, HIV, hepatitis, sepsis, and COVID-19, which has just recently been added. At one point, they were taking COVID-19 because they wanted to study, but now at this point in time, it's considered an infectious disease that they won't accept. So that can change over time. Again, a lot of people end up with sepsis and don't expect to, and then their body can't be accepted. If the body is excessively obese, if the body is deteriorated badly, if there's severe damage in an accident or excessive trauma to the body at the time of death, the Bureau will not accept. And of course, if the Bureau deems it unusable for any other reason, or if any of the organs other than the eyes have been donated. So if you have on your driver's license a little heart, which indicates a little red heart that indicates that you're an organ donor, and your family decides to donate other organs in your body, your heart, your liver, lungs, long bones, or anything along those lines, it could cause the body to be not accepted by the Bureau of Anatomical Services for the exception of eyes. And then another thing to take into consideration when you're talking about donation of a body is LSU, the FACES program, does not return any of the remains. So, and sometimes the family wants cremated remains back to memorialize or bury in their family cemetery or in their family space in their local cemetery. As far as the LSU FACES laboratory program does not do that. Now, the LSU Medical School will return the remains if you have it in writing from the next of kin prior to the donation. So they will return them back to you. Typically, the average is about 3 years.
3 years.
Yes, it can be up to 3 years, yes, that they would have the body. It's not always that case, but there are times that is the case. As far as types of burials, in the top left-hand corner there, you will see a burial vault. Some cemeteries require that the urn or casket be placed in a burial vault before it goes into the ground. That's not a state law. That is actually a requirement of certain cemeteries for the grounds or for the integrity of the burial for the future. So that's an example of a burial vault that the casket or urn would go inside of. In the center picture there with the flags is a traditional type burial space, and it could be a veteran cemetery or even a private cemetery. Many cemeteries flag the graves of veterans on Veterans Day and Memorial Day each year. And that's an example of that there. The top right-hand corner is a mausoleum. That's a particular indoor mausoleum. They could be indoor or outdoors. Many churches, private cemeteries, or even public cemeteries have those available. That particular one there is at Resthaven here. And they actually have the casket in the cremation spaces indoors and outdoors on the wall there. The bottom left-hand corner is an example of a family estate where maybe a family legacy where the family might decide that they want their whole family together. That particular one can accommodate up to like 6 burials. They can be 2, 4, 6, 8, 12. Sometimes in some cemeteries, you can kind of determine how many people you want burial spaces for, so the whole family can kind of be together in a private space. And then in the bottom right-hand corner is an example of a private mausoleum or a tomb, commonly known in the area. They can accommodate from 2 people on up to however many people you want for your family. But that would be constructed, and they take a little bit of time to make. So it does take some pre-planning. It's hard to walk in and say, hey, I want one of these, because they're not typically pre-constructed. So in those cases, you definitely want to pre-plan if something like that would interest you. Now, from a cremation standpoint, there are a number of different ways that you can do cremation, burial in cemeteries. And the left-hand side is an example of a columbarium where the urns can be together, 1 or 2 urns, or some columbariums can accommodate even more urns at one time. Top right-hand corner is an example of a companion cremation slant where the 2 urns go right underneath those black slates, where those names can be placed on those black slates. They're normally set in little cremation gardens or different areas around. In the bottom right-hand corner is a cremation bench. That particular bench there can accommodate up to 8 urns. Some benches can hold 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. That particular bench is large. You can incorporate a vase for flowers. Another option is on this left-hand side. That's a pedestal. They can accommodate up to 4 urns. You can have flowers on top. Other people put little toppers like a Bible or a cross, hummingbirds, horse heads, chess pieces. There's a lot of different options you can do. That particular family there elected to do a flower vase. In the center there looks like a small tomb. It's called an alcove, but it's made to hold that one there, 2 urns. You can have 2, 4, 6. You can get them different sizes. Of course, a little vase there can hold flowers. If you elect to put flowers in there, they can be sandblasted with the names of the family and inscriptions and different things on it. And then the right-hand side, that's an obelisk. That is actually a cremation obelisk, where you can put that one particularly can hold up to 10 cremated remains, so a whole family can do something like that. But they make them smaller if you choose to do that. Another option for cremation it's fairly newer, and it's kind of a shadow box. And typically you have to have an indoor mausoleum to be able to accommodate these. So there's there's only actually, I think, 2 cemeteries in Baton Rouge that actually have glass niches right now. This particular one is one at our cemetery. You can see the size of it on the right-hand side. They vary in height depending upon, but you can get very personal with these. You can place the urn in. You can see on that left-hand side that was Nana's favorite recipe. And of course, Nana is not real. She's fictitious, so we wouldn't put someone's on here that was a personal person, but this one was kind of mocked up so people can understand what a glass niche would look like. Of course, her husband loved to fish, and they loved to play Scrabble together, and she loved to be in the garden. So it kind of shows a person's personal choices and how they live their lives, and they could be decorated accordingly based on individuals' preferences and what they loved, and tell the kind of story about their life. But that's kind of an idea of some. Now, the other thing is that cremated remains can be kept at home, and cremated remains can be scattered. There's a number of different things that you can do. There's what's called solidified cremated remains, where cremated remains would have put into like a stone type. Actually, it was just recently on Shark Tank, where it was called a parting stone. We offer it here. A number of different funeral homes now offer it through that company, Parting Stones, where they solidify the cremated remains and they make it into 40 or 60 different stones. They can be given to different family members. They can be placed in water. So there's a lot of different things that you could do. You've probably heard people turning cremated remains into synthetic diamonds, or even placing them on reefs. So there's a lot of different things that people have, but I'm going to open it up for questions for anybody that may have about any of the things we talked about, or any other items that they would like me to talk about as well.
Good deal. So if you have any questions, please type them in our chat box. So a couple of questions that I have are about So are you interested in just like any general questions or
Yep.
specific to, okay.
Go right ahead.
So I had a family member email us about cremated remains, asking about the laws about where ashes can be sprinkled in Louisiana. Can it be in waterways, on private land, in a swamp, or can they be buried privately? So what are the like legal?
So we get that question a lot, and Louisiana really hasn't addressed it in the law a whole lot. So right now, currently in Louisiana, there are no laws restricting where you can scatter or keep cremated remains. So it's very vague from that standpoint. And they say talk to your local, authorities about it. But one of the main things that we do know is that under the Federal Clean Water Act, there's a federal law that does not permit spreading cremated remains in waterways unless you're 3 nautical miles away from land. So streams wouldn't qualify, or rivers, even the Mississippi River wouldn't qualify because you can't get 3 miles away, nautical miles away from land. But the Lake Pontchartrain, you can. So in Louisiana, there are many bodies of water that you can get 3 miles away from land, but it really limits you. And they do that because the cremated remains can affect our drinking water. They can affect our waterways. That's why I actually worked with a gentleman, for his privacy, I won't say his name, but he's the lead scientist in Louisiana, actually in the US, for lead poisoning. And he's done many research in the New Orleans area, in the Baton Rouge area, about lead poisoning and what happens. And in our cremated remains are lead and other heavy metals. And so if you spread cremated remains on land, and just on top of the land, we have what's called water runoff. So when it rains, those heavy metals then run into our water supply and cause issues. So he actually was going to be cremated, and once green burial became available, he switched over to green burial because then we're burying the body at 3.5 to 6 feet below the earth, and there's no water runoff at that point. So the heavy metals will stay in the lower portion of the earth and not go into our water supply or into playgrounds. A lot of times, if you say spread cremated remains in the Mississippi River, what happens is they end up in river sediment. And then when we fill playgrounds for children or even our own land, we get that river sediment and we take that and we place that as our fill dirt, and we kind of build up on that. And so that heavy metals are right there on the top surface. So he actually changed for that reason, because his studies in playgrounds and use of that dirt in the playgrounds and lead poisoning in children. So it's not considered healthy to place those cremated remains near land or on land. So that's more of an environmental standpoint than a law, except for the Federal Clean Water Act, where you should do it 3 nautical miles away. So no beaches, no wading pools or anything along those lines from that standpoint. But a lot of people will say, hey, I want to spread my cremated remains on LSU Stadium. Well, it's public land per se, but they do not permit cremated remains to go in that area. And it makes sense because, those college students are getting tackled into that. And a lot of people don't realize that cremated remains is about 6 pounds, about the amount of a 5-pound bag of flour or sugar. That's a lot of cremated remains that just kind of put somewhere, makes a mound. It's not really safe. And the amount of people that want to do that, you would have a definitely looking Tiger Stadium after that.
Yeah.
But Smoky Mountains, I hear all the time, we're going to take mom or daddy to the Smoky Mountains. And it is permitted in the Smoky Mountains with written permission from the park services. So they don't, even though it's a huge park and they'll never see you doing it, they're asking that you go get written permission from them. Because they are going to tell you where you can and can't spread the cremated remains, and they're going to try and make sure it's away from where the public go. A lot of people don't realize this, but if you just spread cremated remains, it just sits on top, and it can be very affect people emotionally when they walk up on it. So if you just did it on some walking trail in Louisiana here, or even the Smoky Mountains or anywhere else, people will come upon that, and there's bone fragments in there. Sometimes that can be alarming to people and say, "Oh my gosh, what happened?" And so we ask that you think those things through before you do them. But as far as you burying, currently, you can bury your cremated remains in your yard. There's talk of legislation that you may have to disclose that in the future with a sale. So you want to kind of make sure or dig it up and bring it with you. So those are things you kind of want to think about. But the biggest issue that I see with scatter and cremated remains is a lot of times you can't memorialize. You can't remember that person. So that's why it's a good idea to look at maybe some of the ideas that I talked about in cemeteries, where we keep your loved one for perpetuity and they get to be remembered for forever. And people can go there. It's one of those glass niches and see it, or something with the, etched name and dates and possibly their favorite saying on there, or things that they may have been known for saying or known for doing. So it's a really good thing to kind of look at. Now, as far as parks and stuff in the Baton Rouge area, Brex, as of right now, the recreation group does not have any regulation against it. Matter of fact, I reached out to them and they said, look, we don't have any rules or regulations against it, but we really need to probably wonder if you're going to do that here and why you would want to do it here. So they're even wondering, why would somebody want to go to a park and spread some cremated remains? So hopefully that answers the question from that standpoint.
Yeah, and I think what you just said kind of brought up an interesting point that, each family, each individual will have their own personal wishes of what, what will be done with their remains after they pass, but also each family would like something individual when it comes to celebrating someone's life, or personalizing a memorial service of some type. And there are so many different options available to someone, possibly than just the run of the mill, go to the church and then go to the funeral home, blah blah blah. So can you talk about a little bit about ways to personalize funerals or personalize end of life celebrations in general?
Absolutely. I sat with a gentleman one time. His name was Rob. I can say that part. But his name was Rob, and he came to me and he said, look, I want to do a service after I pass, but I want it to be very unique. So he said, look, the night before my funeral service, which is going to be a traditional type church service, he says, I want to have a last round on Rob. I don't want to invite any of my family members. I just want my friends and their spouses to come. I want high top tables. And I want a bartender to be there. And I said, whoa, hold on. I said, well, here at the funeral home, we don't have our liquor license. He says, yeah, but the bartender will. You get a mobile bartender and he'll be able to do it. So he prearranged that he's going to have last round on Rob before the funeral services. So there's a lot of things you can do. I had one lady that she actually got prearranged. I met with her at the casino. She's going to have her full body laid out in the ballroom. She's going to have one ballroom for her body to be laid out in, and the next room over is going to have the buffet. I sat down with the food service department and the event service department, and she put $300 for people to get quarters, which I know they don't have quarter machines anymore, to go down and pull the lever in her honor. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways that you can do it. I've done funerals where we've had the urn present in bars, a local bar, and we had the services there. The funeral director was there, everybody was there, and we had it in a local bar, their favorite place that they like to go with their friends and have a drink. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do your services that are a lot different than the traditional type service. It just depends on what you would like to do or what you want to do to honor your loved one. So, you can kind of get off the script of what you would like to see from a funeral service and also from a burial standpoint. I mean, there's a lot of people that do a lot of different things.
Yeah, yeah. And I think possibly that could be one of the reasons why people are fearful of this topic or dislike talking about the topic of end of life or end of life planning, funeral planning, is because possibly they don't connect with the quote unquote traditional, what their parents did, what their grandparents did, and possibly that they would feel more comfortable talking about it if it was individualized. So that is another benefit of advanced planning, is, having the space to think about exactly what you would feel comfortable with, how you would like to be remembered, or even, if you're one of those people that are just so humble, you don't want a whole bunch, well, at least that could be pre-written so that your family doesn't throw a huge, party, if you don't want that.
Yeah, that happens quite a bit. Actually, we'll have someone like that, that will, like, I don't want a big fuss about me, but their family does. And so what pre-planning does is actually have them have that conversation. And especially you talked about spooky season, and we're going to spooky season, but we're really going into is the time of year that everybody gets together. If it wasn't for spooky season, it's going to be Thanksgiving or even Christmas. And this time of year, we all get together a lot with our extended families, and where you say, man, I really don't want to be a buzzkill at the Christmas party, but I'm going to have all my kids together, and I really would like to have this conversation. And a lot of people do. They'll have the party, but then they'll have that serious time where they sit down and say, okay, I really would like your feelings on this. And a lot of times the kids will be like, whatever you want, mom, whatever you want, dad, we'll kind of back you. But quite honestly, you say, hey, we don't have any funeral services at all. You may get a little pushback from the kids because they want to honor you and they feel like they need to honor you. So having that dialogue is very important to do, because you will get their scope on it and how they actually see it. I sit down with families all the time, and the husband will say, yeah, throw me in the river, cremate me and throw me in the river. I don't care what you do. And it horrifies the kids that they would think that that's the way that would be. They know that's how their dad would respond. However, they can't see themselves doing that because they would feel it's out of a dishonor that he was just kidding. He was saying that in jest. And a lot of times with this topic, we do a lot of joking, a lot of in jest. But it's a serious issue because one day they're going to sit across from that person, that funeral director, and have to make some of these decisions, or that anatomical services, and say, okay, am I seriously going to possibly turn my mom over and never get her remains back? And how do I feel about that? Because I know that was her wishes, but how do I feel about that aspect of it? And it's good to have that conversation ahead of time, an honest, open conversation to kind of feel what everybody's feeling. Because like I said, I have 4 kids. They'll have 4 different opinions on what to do with me. If I talk to them about what my wishes are and hear their wishes for me, it could be huge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. You mentioned briefly earlier that there are documents that a lot of funeral homes have that can, be a space that people can write these wishes down on, or at least prompt someone into how to have this conversation with their loved ones. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So we have what's called a pre-planning guide, and it's a book of things that people need to know to do, or choices that need to be made or talked about. And it goes through the very first things of, like, how many years were you married? Where is your, where were you married? Where were your parents born? Where were you born? What was your occupation? What is your highest degree of education? All those things are on the death certificate. And so those questions are in there, but then it gets into other things. And those questions are like, hey, what life insurances do you have? And what investments do you have? And that's not for the funeral home to know, but the book is used so your loved ones know, so you can handle those things after someone passes, because people don't think about that aspect of it. We think funeral and we think the ceremony and when's the burial, where we're gonna do with the cremation. But after the fact, there's so much business that needs to be handled. That person's affairs, their home, succession. Do I need to do succession? What do I need to do about their credit reporting agencies? One of the things that we do here is we utilize some of the information that they wrote in that book, and then help you notify Experian, TransUnion, Equifax, so no one can take their identity. What to do with the driver's license of the pharmaceuticals that are left over afterwards, and canceling those different things. What to do about the electric bill, and what if the electric bill was in dad's name and mom's still with us? Do we need to move that over to mom's name? So those are all different things that book, when you write them down, it helps them out. Because like I told you, I have 4 kids, but I'm not ready to tell them about all my financial information. I'm not really willing to tell them about all the banks I have my money in. Those are things that I'm not ready to kind of let go. At some point I might have to, for my own purposes, especially when you deal with things like Alzheimer's and such, that you may have to have somebody be a power of attorney, or for medical or even fiduciary reasons, durable power of attorneys. So those things are all situations that in this book kind of help encapsulate the information for that caretaker, for the person that needs that. So later on, they can disseminate what they need to do and handle and go through. So that's some of it. The other thing is In some cases, you can pre-make the decision to be cremated. Now, you can do the planning for the cremation and so forth, but there are some legal things you can do to make sure that that cremation can go off without a hitch. Because a lot of times, if we just have our children left behind, we're going to need all those children to sign in some cases. Now, Louisiana law states a majority has to, but a lot of funeral homes have the ruling that they want 100% of those signatures to be able to get that cremation taken care of. So you could do some declarations ahead of time to get those cremation legal things in order. And even not just the cremation aspect, but the burial too. I might, out of my 4 kids, I might have some estranged children. And to get the burial done, I might need to get signatures from all of those next of kin, which could be all of the children. So I can actually do some things legally to make sure that that one person has the authority as a registered agent to make those decisions for me. And people will go, well, I have that in my will. I have an executor. Well, that doesn't work unless it specifically states that in there, that they have disposition over your remains in your funeral services. Because if it doesn't specifically state that, then you're just a facilitator and not a full decision maker. So it just depends on what's in the will and how it's written. So I always say, hey, bring those things to your local funeral home. Let the people that do this every day take a look at that and make sure things are in order so you don't run into a hiccup, because it happens on a regular basis that we need more people involved than you expected.
Absolutely. And I think you bring up a really good point when it comes to that, preparation documents. We have also a few different types of documents like that here within our resource library, but I'm so glad that there are other spaces that you can go, and probably just online. You can do a simple, online search and find some good resources like that.
Some of them have to be specific to Louisiana. There are some specific laws in Louisiana that if you find them online, you want to make sure that they're going to accommodate everything that you need in the wording.
Yes, absolutely. But in that same, line of thought, there are a lot of different conversations and preparation, conversations that can be had regarding, future planning for your loved one while they are very much still alive, just end of life planning. We have actually a past presentation that was done on our YouTube channel. It's called Adaptive End of Life Care. And that is all talking about, all of this stuff, but while you are the decision maker. And then we also have a booklet kind of similar to what you were talking about. That's like a legacy planner that was made by a local CPA firm that talks a lot about different financial aspects. Because of course, within this series, we talk a lot about trusts and probate and making sure that you are preparing your finances for for the future. So always good to know what of those physical resources and support services are out there. So a few other questions that I have for consultation wise, when, like, let's say you're a family member and you or an individual that is just starting along this path, wanting to prepare for myself and my spouse, is there a price commitment to come and meet with a funeral home? Or I know we can't speak about specific costs, but even talking about predicted cost range, if you could touch on that.
Yeah, so most of the time, and I can't speak for all funeral homes, but I believe this is the case in all funeral homes in this area. It's complimentary to sit down. It costs nothing to pre-plan. You can come in to, say, our funeral home and sit down with an expert. They literally will plan everything out with you. They will give you today's cost. You can lock those costs in by funding some of this thing. But I always recommend bringing, if you plan on using life insurance or something along those lines, bring it with you. A lot of times a death will occur and the policy may not be assignable, meaning that the insurance company won't assign those funds directly to the funeral home. So therefore the funeral home can't accept that as payment. And so then the family was planning to use this life insurance policy to pay for everything. And now they're finding out that it's not good at a funeral home at all, any funeral home. So you can look at those are important things to sit down and have that pre-talk about and bring those life insurance policies or annuities and so forth that you may want to use as payment. Now, as far as the cost associated with that, it doesn't cost anything to plan. I mean, I would sit down with, that's the number one thing you should do is go sit down and at least start talking about a plan and see what those costs look like for you. Now, as far as broad ranges of pricing, man, just cremation alone, it varies depending upon the establishment that you go to. A direct cremation, like we talked about the top level that you'll be about is about $5,000. Of course, you can find that at every level below that. When you start talking about funeral services, it really has to do with a lot of choices that have to be made. Like I said, there's caskets that come into play. That really is the biggest driving cost a lot of times in a funeral service, because the materials that it's made out of. Like there are some basic materials like poplar wood, but then there's lower than like a poplar hardwood. You can use like caskets that are made out of fiberboard type materials, pressboard type materials that are a little bit inferior to like a hardwood casket. But when you start talking about hardwood caskets, you go up. When you start talking about maple, oak, cherry, and of course mahogany, those costs can really accelerate the cost of the funeral. When the funeral cost, stays the same, it's just the materials and the choices that you make. Like I told you, I'm planning 2 weddings right now, and they're in 2 totally different spectrums cost-wise. And the reason why is because the things that are selected. I mean, if you choose orchid flowers versus carnations, there's a huge cost difference when you start talking about those things. And how many flower pieces do you want? I know families that get like 5 or 6 flower pieces. And some families are like, no, we just want something simple on top of the casket. So the cost can be definitely changed based on what you want to do, the type of services that you want to have. Like I said, one of the type that people choose are graveside, and other people type will have it elaborate funeral services, at high church and, in the cathedrals, so it just really depends on the type of services that you're going to have and where they can range. Most funeral services, traditional funeral services are going to start in this, $7,000-8,000 range, and then going up once you have caskets and everything else to that can be 15, 16, 18. I've seen over $20,000, but it just really depends on personal choices and things that people want. Doesn't have to be that way. Cremation can be the same way. You can have something that's really inexpensive, or you can have something that is elaborate from a cremation standpoint. You can have, the big fancy casket with the laid out in the church and everything else, just like traditional funeral service would be, and kind of be right around the funerals that cost. I had a gentleman that chose a mahogany casket, which is very expensive, and chose to cremate it. And he cremated that expensive casket, and people are like, oh my gosh, he cremated that, really? But it's that, or he would have put it in the ground. So I guess it's kind of, one way or the other, it's kind of the same. So it just depends upon the personal preferences on what you would want to have. I'll say this, that you can find a funeral service on any budget. So if you don't want to be cremated, there are ways to budget to be able to do a burial. The most important thing is to pre-plan ahead of time, sit down and not make those decisions at an emotional time. If you don't pre-plan, then you're sitting at a funeral home and you're having to make those decisions that day in that moment. And a lot of times we make those decisions emotionally. And sometimes we emotionally overspend even in those scenarios, because you have more than one voice and people in your ear, and you're making decisions that you are under a high pressure scenario, where if you could pre-plan those things, sit down, you can think about it, make wise financial decisions, wise emotional decisions, and take a lot of the stress off of that. I started this with life's most stressful events. Why would you want to make these huge financial decisions under that type of emotional stress? You're on here, so you're probably dealing or caretaking with Alzheimer's, and that's enough stress to deal with all of these emotions and all of these things, trying to make the right decisions. Why not make some of those choices ahead of time? So when the time does come, you're making the decision on the time and the date of the funeral, not wood or metal casket. Am I overspending or not overspending? Should we have it at church? Should we just have it at the funeral home? Should we have it at the such and such event center? Which church should we go to? Mama always went to this church, but we go to this church and we like how this guy speaks. All those conversations can be had ahead of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think I appreciate how you said that. And I think it also, again, just drives the point home of appointing either a power of attorney or, a decision maker within your family that you trust to carry out your wishes or your loved one's wishes that, it carries through to so many avenues that you don't even think of when it just comes. You may think that that just stands for medical decisions while the person's alive, but really having that point person for big decisions lasts further than just simple,
One thing,
simple medical
yeah,
decisions.
yeah, one thing about power of attorney though, power of attorney ends at death. And that a lot of people will bring those power of attorneys to us and we're like, you can't make those decisions anymore.
Mhm.
It's not in your power anymore. And so you can put in a power of attorney specific things that they still have control over those things after you die. But that has to be specifically written into the power of attorney. And so that's why I recommend bring that power of attorney with you when you come to pre-talk to your funeral home, because we can look at that and make sure it has everything you need to have that. So power of attorney can't do that after the death occurs. So, but there are some lines that you can put in that power of attorney to allow it to continue. But if not, there are what's called registered agents that you can place in power of that after outside of the power of attorney. And then you can also place it in your will, but it has to be specifically written that it's for the disposition and the funeral arrangements and so forth. Because if not, it falls to all next of kin.
Mm. All great questions to bring to your free consultation with an elder law attorney that you get after this series. So a few more questions from the chat before we wrap it up. What are some memorial items a family can get with cremated remains?
Oh, good question. I talked about a couple of them. You can actually have cremated remains turned into that parting stone, which is like a little mineral solidified stone. You can also be turned into diamonds. That's been done by a lot of different individuals. One of the things without cremation or burial that a lot of funeral homes offer now is like a thumbprint, where they actually take the thumbprint and they can put that on cufflinks and charms and different things along those lines as a memorial item that has nothing to do with cremation. But then also there's jewelry that cremated remains can be placed in. Now, I think it's a beautiful thing, but I also find that jewelry gets lost or broken. And the cremated remains sometimes are a little more sentimental than the actual jewelry you lose. So I see, and it's a very small amount of the cremated remains that typically go in there, but people get emotionally affected when they lose that or it breaks off because the chain broke or something along those lines, and they lose the cremated remains. It becomes something that's more emotional. So yes, you could do, a cremation jewelry. Some other memorial items that people do is there's actually even blown glass, where you can blow cremated remains into blown glass into art pieces, which are really beautiful. And of course, some people choose an urn that represents the person's personality. So if they love bowling, there's actually bowling pin urns. I'm just one example. But there's even urn companies out there that will make an exact replica of your home. These days with 3D printers, they can do all kind of things. So they'll make that, and then they'll put the cremated remains in a replica of your home, and you can place it in like the glass niche at the cemetery. That some people have cars, they love cars, they have antique cars, and they can turn that into the same thing. So that information or that type of sentimental memorial items are important. A lot of funeral homes offer the picture that's used for the funeral service to be printed like in a 16 by 20, and so the family could take that home from a memorial standpoint, so that that memory photo that is prepared for the obituary and so forth. So those are just some of the memorial items that you can do.
Yeah. And we have a client here that her husband recently passed away, and she was showing us that from the funeral, some of the flowers that were present at the funeral, they made jewelry and rosaries and different sentimental items for the family out of the flowers that were used at the funeral. So also, lots of personalized, ideas that could be done. and good to just talk about. Kind of on that same track, somebody asked about planting trees as a part of burials,
Okay.
and burying remains, not specified whether cremated remains or not, and planting a tree on top. Have
Okay.
you heard of
So,
that? Is that
yeah.
something that's commonly done?
So there are a couple urns that actually promote that that you put the cremated remains in that urn, and the urn actually has seeds in it. And then you plant the urn, and then the seeds will grow. There are a couple things to keep into consideration when you do that type or expect to plant a tree. Cremated remains themselves are made up of a composite of phosphate, calcium, sulfate, potassium, a bunch of different things. But cremated remains have been known to change the pH of the soil because it is 6 pounds. You can imagine taking fertilizer and putting it on like a big old pile right on top of your grass, it's going to burn it. If you have concentrated cremated remains and you just place them in the earth, it's going to cause the soil pH to change in such a way that is not healthy for the plant life. So if you're going to take a small amount of cremated remains, like a portion of it, and bury that portion and expect the tree to grow, that would work. If not, you're actually going to poison the tree and not have it be successfully grown because of the fact that the cremated remains is so much that it will change the pH of the soil in that area. Now, as far as burial is concerned, if you do like a green burial with a tree over it, first off, you can't just bury a body just anywhere. It has to be in a cemetery in the state of Louisiana. Now, again, your private land can be, but there are a lot of rules and regulations you need to contact the Louisiana Cemetery Board about to dedicate your property as a cemetery and what that means and what it entails. You can't be in an HOA. You can't have a lien on the house. You can't have a mortgage on the home because it could stop the sale of the house because you've added a cemetery. So all of those types of things need to kind of be taken into consideration when you start talking about a body. But in like green burial, it's 3.5 feet down, the body is. So it has no bearing on per se. It's actually good for the environment from that standpoint because it decomposes over time and it has benefits to insects and things under the ground, worms and such. That actually is healthy for anything planted on it. So yeah, in a lot of green burial scenarios, you'll see people be able to plant trees and be successful because of how it is. It's more of a natural type burial than a cremation going into the ground.
See, and I didn't know I was going to get a horticultural lesson today, but that's fantastic. Good to know. Good info. We have a couple more minutes if anybody has any questions. If not, Mr. Pierce, I'm curious, what is one thing that you wish just like the average family knew about funeral planning, advanced planning, all of that good stuff?
Probably the biggest thing is that there's a lot of myths. From a veteran standpoint, people believe that the Veterans Administration is going to pay for their funeral service. That I'm a veteran, they're going to pay for me to get cremated. It's not true. They will pay for some funeral services if you die in active duty, but that's a serviceman dying in active duty, and there are limits even in that one. The Marines are going to give me a casket. Not the case. You can get a Marine casket. It's not from the Marines, but it's a Marine decorated one, but you're going to pay for it. Now, just recently, the Veterans Administration is giving urns to veterans, but you forfeit your ability to be buried in a veteran cemetery or get a memorial plaque in a private cemetery or a medallion in a private cemetery when you take that urn. So that urn's valued at about $400, and you're giving up your right to thousands of dollars of other burial rights by taking that urn. And they got to make sure that they know that. So that's some of the things. There's some myths that have around it. Another myth is that I'm going to that Social Security is going to pay a death benefit to me, and they will. If you have a spouse or a dependent child, that person will get a death benefit. It's $255, but they think that in some way Social Security is actually going to help pay for that, or that their insurance policy is going to be able to pay for everything, when sometimes it's not the case because they're not assignable, they may not even be around. That insurance policy might not be good. when you actually do die, because only about 55% of whole life policies pay out, but only about 3% of term life policies pay out. So it's very good to get educated on those things.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's good to talk with an expert that knows the questions to ask when it comes to all of those, pre-planning questions. Fantastic. Well, Mr. Pierce, thank you so much for your time today. We're just about at 1 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and end the presentation. Is it okay if I share your contact information with the folks on the Zoom?
Absolutely.
Good deal. I'll send a follow-up email to everybody after today's call, but thank y'all so much for joining us today. Thank you, Mr. Pierce, for your time. And hopefully we see all of y'all at some other November Alzheimer's Awareness Month events.
Thank you so much.
Good deal. Thank y'all. Have a great rest of your day.